Jay.
Marcus.
Answer.
And I'm Shreyas.
So first, we're going to go with the trading trends of the United States. As you can see, from 2018 to 2019, we see a small decrease in the overall trading value. And then as we start to hit the pandemic and we start to see things like lockdowns and economic restrictions, we see a decrease of around $800 billion in our overall trading value. And then from 2020 to 2021, as we start to see an uplift in restrictions and lockdowns and things like that, we see a pretty significant increase in our overall trading value of well over $1 trillion. And then we can also look individually for United States at the exports and imports that follow about the same trend with, again, the trend of 2019 to 2020, a little bit of a drop. And then 2020 to 2021, we see an increase. Specifically for imports, we see around a 21% increase. And for exports, we see a 24% increase coming out of 2021. So we see exports increasing just a bit more than imports do. And then to answer number 3, as well as just give more information on the United States, here are the top trading partners before and after. For before and after the pandemic, both of them, our top 3 trading partners are China, Canada, and Mexico. Although after or during the pandemic, we actually traded less with Canada and Mexico while we traded more with China, which allowed China to become our second biggest trading partner over Canada. Next, we have Canada. We can see around the same trend as we do with the United States, that small decrease from 2018 to 2019, with the bigger drop coming into 2020 of around over $1 trillion. And then coming out of the pandemic, or coming out of like the restrictions and the pandemic starting to wane down a little bit into 2021, we see about a 19% increase in the overall trading value for Canada. And then again, you can look specifically at the imports and exports, which follow around the same trend. And we see that exports seem to increase a little bit more than imports do coming out of the pandemic.
The trading trends of Mexico. So for export, before pandemic, from 2018 to 2019, the exports were kind of slightly down, but yet steady. So from 2019 to 2020, the exports went down to $700 million on average. And from 2020 to 2021, just after pandemic, it went up till $800 million. And for imports, on average, from 2018 to 2019, the imports were kind of steady on line between $600 million and $500 million. And right after 2019, the imports were down to $400 million on average. So from 2020 to 2021, it went slightly upward till $500 million on average. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So for the trading trends of Germany, you can see that at the beginning of 2018, the combined value of Germany's imports and exports totals to about 2.85 trillion US dollars. And you can see that in 2020, that's when most of the world, Germany included, takes a big hit due to COVID, drops by about 11%. And the imports especially drops off rather steeply, as well as the exports, to give you the curve that you can see in front of you. Next one.
Trading trends of India.
You skipped the UK. So for the UK, it follows a relatively similar curve as Germany. Though interestingly, during 2019, UK's imports rise by about 3% from 2018, which is kind of interesting, and we'll go into more detail about that later. So when combined with its exports, it still has a very slight uptick with the total trade value, although the exports does follow roughly the same trend that Germany's exports did.
So the trading trends of India. India is the 9th largest good trading partner in the world. During the during the year end of 2018, India has 1,660,000 total trades, with having developing countries like Nepal, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Maldives as the neighboring countries. India does a lot of exports. The number of exports done by India in 2018 was about $645 million, and the import were about $1,016 million. The total trade dipped to 1,604 million during 2019. The exports were increased by 2 million, but the imports decreased to $957 million. In 2020, during COVID, the total trade had a massive decrease to about $1,286 million, which was due to decrease in export and import. In 2021, the export and import raised massively that resulted on a huge increase in total trade value.
For the trading trends of Japan, as you can see from 2018 to 2019, there was a $5.94 trillion in trade value, and for 2019, there was $5.7 trillion. And as for the exports and imports, there was 2.82 trillion, and then 2.56 trillion in exports. For imports, it was 2.8 as well as 2.54. Now, during the pandemic, there was a significant decrease in the transitions of 2019 through 2020, as you can see from that. And they had nearly decreased in $600 billion from 5.7 trillion to 5.1 trillion. And however, from 2020 to 2021, the trading values have increased to nearly $1 billion, which is very interesting. Moreover, that $6.1 trillion in which was higher than the pre-pandemic. So the grand total of the exports was 5.58 trillion and imports was 5.6 trillion, as you can see in both of those charts in the second view.
So for trading trends of Hong Kong, from on average from 2018 to 2019, there's a steady export. So from 2019 to 2020, there's a slightly upward trend on exports. And from 2020 to 2021, right after pandemic, there's a huge boom in export. So it was like till $600 million on average. So for imports, the imports were dropping from 2018 to 2019, and then there's a slightly upward trend in from 2019 to 2020, and from 2020 to 2021, it rose till $700 million on average.
So moving on to the continents themselves, for North America, we kind of see it following the trend of the U.S. and Canada more strongly, while Mexico kind of acted as a little bit of an outlier. So like U.S. and Canada, we see that 2018 to 2019 small decrease in overall trading value, and then the drop from 2019 to 2020 of around $1 trillion. And then that was as the pandemic starts to spread throughout North America. And then as most countries in North America start to lift their restrictions from 2020 to 2021, we see around a 17% increase of the total trading value. And then again, if you look individually at exports and imports, it follows the same trend. And it seems that imports has slightly increased more than exports do for all of North America. And then as we can see here, this is the trading partners from before and after the pandemic. There was really no big change with the main trading partners, like the bigger trading partners. It's really just in a few of the European countries, there's kind of a flip-flop of who we trade with more and less. And then for the data validation of North America, I just did a few transactions between Mexico and Canada and Mexico and the US. And the values were a bit off, but these discrepancies could be chalked up to things like a difference in reporting transactions or a difference in just the overall value of a product, depending on what country it's in.
So for the trends of Europe, I simply combined the data from both Germany and the UK. And judging by their relatively similar curves, it's not a surprise to see that Europe's trade value curve follows roughly the same shape. You start at the value that you have in 2018. In this case, it's 4 trillion US dollars, and then you have a slight downturn going into 2019, with the exception of UK's imports. But then the biggest drop happens in 2020, which compared to its value in 2018 is across the board about 11 to 10% less. In this case, about 3.6 trillion US dollars, and then recovers again in 2021 with about a 12% uptick. And you can see with the exports that the decrease for Germany was so much that the uptick that the UK experienced was overrun. And then these are the top 10 countries that both Germany and the UK had traded with the United States of America being the most and Belgium being the 10th. And the US and the UK took the biggest hit going into the pandemic. On the left is pre-pandemic 2018 and 2019, and on the right is 2020 and 2021. From before to after the pandemic, the US and the UK dropped by about $50 billion in their trade value, with China about 25 billion. And weirdly, Switzerland actually experienced a little bit of an uptick. And if you go to the next slide, you'll be able to see why. So this is likely a reason why the UK had a very big uptick in the period of 2019. The number at the bottom indicates the months it's been since January 2018. So 20 would be about August or September of 2019. And right around that time, there was a huge spike in the exports between the UK and Switzerland. And there's also just a bunch of weird upticks after the pandemic between the UK and Switzerland. And it should be noted that these graphs are in billions of US dollars, but I had neglected to add that label there. And for the data validation for Europe, did relatively the same thing as Marcus, where I took transactions between Germany and a country, US, and the UK and a country, in this case Canada, so his countries. And you can see that the values are very similar, but any discrepancies that there are likely due to just any slight variation in the manner of reporting, and the value of one good compared from one country to another may be slightly different. It all depends on who's buying and who's selling.
As for the entire continents listed, all three, Asia is the most well off impacted from the pandemic. The US and Europe, however, they were impacted. They weren't as strongly as for Asia. Now, from the pandemic's impact for Asia, it was very significant, as said before. All three of the countries listed for Asia had drastic changes from the transitions of 2019 to 2020, as you can see from the first graph. And as for Asia, struggling with stabilizing its people and the virus. But as regulations have been lifted, or less regulated, I'd say, the whole continent was able to increase their productions and had a higher output in trading values with their exports and imports, as you can see for the second chart. And you can see that there was a significant growth from 2018 pre-pandemic through 2021 as for after or during the pandemic. And for the data validation of Asia, I did very similar to what Marcus and Spencer did with the transactions, where I did Japan to India and India to Hong Kong. And yes, there are factors with the differentiation in the values, but again, it's for the most part is very similar. As for the tools we used Excel itself, how to render the data and to filter out the exports and imports of each single country and for its exports and imports. We had used Tableau as well to create the visuals, and Google Collaboratory with Python and the package of pandas to code, and that's for Spencer's visuals. But thank you so much for this opportunity. We had a very fun time doing so, and we were able to make up all these visuals you can see from this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.